For the last week of the summer holidays, we hit the road on the campaign trail. Millions of Canadians are trying to make decisions about which party to vote for and which leader to vote for. Our voyage across the country by air, by road, by foot was to help Canadians answer those questions. The main party leaders all agreed to interviews. Because some of the questions would be similar, we decided no interview would air before the others were completed. So tonight, on this extended edition of One-on-One, the leaders, we begin with Stephen Harper.
Canadians will make a critical decision about the direction of our country.
Proven leadership. That's been Stephen Harper's claim through this campaign. But it hasn't been a smooth ride for the Conservative leader in the first 5 of 11 weeks. His leadership has been questioned. The resumption of the Duffy trial saw key players from his office on the witness stand. The economy fell into recession for the second time since he came to office. And Canada's response to a growing refugee crisis has taken center stage in the campaign. We met on a farm in Delta, BC. Most Canadians say, at least according to the polls, that they want change in this election. You're the one who's campaigning on no change. I've got the right way, stay the course. How do you campaign in that kind of an atmosphere?
Well, look, I wouldn't quite simplify it that much, Peter. I mean, we are obviously constantly modifying, evolving our policy. I made some significant announcements during the campaign, but the core of our economic policy, as you know, has been to establish solid economic fundamentals, to establish a solid balanced budget framework that involves lower taxes, but to make targeted investments that will help people's lives and that will grow key sectors of the economy. We think that's whether it's change or not, we think it's a fundamentally right path. We think that the other path is really summarized very easy. It's spend tens of billions of dollars or more, financed by a combination of permanent deficits and tax increases. And we think people will understand that that's a very bad change for this country and would put us where a lot of other countries have been and where we don't want to go.
But they don't seem to be seeing that. They seem to be saying they want change.
Well,
up to 70%.
Well,
time
will tell, Peter.
So you think that'll change?
Well, time will tell. Look, there's a lot of polls out there. There's a lot of inaccurate polls. I think in the end, people don't make their decision based on polls. They make their decisions based on their assessments of the future, their own lives.
What do you think it is, though, that they want to see change in you?
I don't know about that. Look, people want to see. People want to see everything. People want to see everything in a leader, right? I am who I am. Canadians know me. I'm not perfect, but I'm dedicated to my country. I love my country. I think I've done as good a job as I can do, and I lead a great team of people.
You talk about the economy,
yep,
and your record on that. Let me deal with the economy this way. I want to remind you something you said at the beginning of the 2008 campaign.
Sorry. This was before the global financial crisis.
Before the global financial, but not that long before the global financial crisis.
Before it hit.
It was about a month or so before. Here's what you said, September 15th, 08. My own belief is if we were going to have any big crash or recession, we probably would have had it by now.
Right.
Now, within a month, 2 months, we had the big crash, and we were definitely in one of the worst recessions of modern times.
Yeah.
Now, today, we're in a recession, just announced, but you say we're coming out of it, and their indicators suggest that. But why, given your track record on analysis, and you're not alone as an economist, we all know the stories about economists.
Very few people predicted what happened in 08, right?
Well, some did,
yeah,
but nevertheless,
very few.
Given what happened then, why should they believe now that you're right in your analysis of what's going to happen?
Well, look, I would say two things to that, Peter. First of all, I would disagree with the analysis you just put out. Where are we right now? We have had, as the Bank of Canada has said, most of the economy has actually been growing. The most recent figures showing the economy is growing as a whole. I think what that whole period should tell us is that, analysis is great, but in the end, you don't know what you're actually going to be dealing with. We're in a very unstable world. Ever since then, it has been very unstable.
But that's my point.
I guess my point is, Peter, that through those ups and downs, this government has shown that it has a long-term plan and also ability to adapt to situations. What the other guys do is they simply propose the same policies all the time. We should always spend more. Like whatever, this government has.
Well, in
tripled.
fairness, the
This- no,
NDP
no,
says
fairness.
it will balance the budget. The
But-
Liberals say they won't.
Well,
they will go into deficit.
The NDP is promising, we have costed $35 billion of annual spending promises. The Liberal Party's gone back and forth on whether deficits were good or bad. Same problem. They can't make their numbers add up, so they admit they're running a deficit. But the fact is their policies just spend more. Take infrastructure. We have tripled the amount of money the federal government is spending on national infrastructure. And so the other guys come along and say, well, we'll double or triple that. I mean, come on. People aren't dumb. What's the new idea? If all you want to do is spend more, how are you going to pay for it?
How are you going to pay for it? It's not like you haven't made promises this year. Many throughout this year, billions of dollars worth in new programs, a lot of announcements just in the days before the campaign started. How convinced are you, given the uncertain economic climate, that you can come in with a surplus position at the end of the fiscal?
Look, Peter, first of all, it's not true that we have made, the other guys have made tens of billions of promises, that we have made large-scale promises. All of the commitments we made prior to the election were from the budget. And as I say, we're well within, our budget is well ahead of where we thought it would be, but we're going to be well within budget. There is an order of magnitude difference between the scale of the campaign commitments we have made and what the other guys have made.
What will you do October 20th if you're re-elected? You come back into your office, you got the dollar in the mid-70s, oil in the mid-40s. We're in a recession. I appreciate what you're suggesting about where we are, but nevertheless, the definition is there.
Well, look, no, I think the economy is growing now, and I think it will be growing in October. It is growing now.
Well, and proven in the last month of the 6 months that have been registered so far. However, the R word is still attached to the Canadian economy at the moment in terms of the big picture.
Actually, I think the truth is there's a real debate around economists among that. I mean, we have had job...
Gosh, what a surprise, a debate among economists.
No, but we've had job creation over the period of the so-called recession. We've had the government's revenues growing over the period of the so-called recession.
But back to my question, what do you do day one? Is there anything you do on the economy, on the economic future of the country, given those particulars in terms of what we're stacked up against?
Well, look, we're going to continue doing the kinds of things that we have been doing. I
So
mean,
nothing changes.
Obviously, the governor of the Bank of Canada will be handling monetary policy in the dollar, and we all know that's done independently, and it should be as it should be. But look, we will continue to deliver increased tax breaks and benefits to people where we can afford them. We'll continue to make the investments we need to make to build this economy in the longer term.
Are you going to make cuts? Are there cuts in the offing?
No, we don't have cuts in the offing.
No need for cuts.
We have. This is exactly what I said in 2011, Peter. You asked me. I should pull up some of the things you said.
No, you're not allowed to do that.
We said, how would we balance the budget? We said we were going to balance the budget by restraining the growth of spending and making sure that our revenue was able to catch up. That's exactly what we did.
Part of your campaign slogan is proven leadership.
Yep.
Now, I want to talk about leadership for a moment, as it has come to light over the last month or so in terms of what was going on inside your office during the so-called Wright Duffy affair. You fired your chief of staff for, in your words, deception, that he deceived you on what was going on. The documents that have been released publicly clearly suggest that there was a lot more than he who knew what was going on within your office, upwards of a dozen people, some of whom worked in your office. At any point, did you go to them and say, why didn't you tell me about this?
Well, look, Peter, I don't think the facts actually reflect that. As you know, these things are in dispute in a court. Many of the people.
Well, it's not in dispute that they were sent emails about these.
Many of the people
issues.
who are saying you're saying knew, say clearly they didn't know, and I think in fact the bulk of the evidence is on their side. But I'll let the look.
Others have said they did know.
But I'll let the court resolve that. The chief of staff is the guy who reports to me. I think he will be the first to admit it was his obligation to tell me that he had decided, for reasons that really only he can explain, he had decided to go on a different course. I had told Mr. Duffy he should repay his expenses, and I was told he had repaid his expenses, which seemed to me the logical thing. It turned out, of course, that hadn't happened. Mr. Wright had decided, for his own reasons, to repay them himself. He was the one acting, directing that, and he had every obligation to tell me that. And I don't, you can't, Peter, place that obligation on people who worked under him. That's just not fair.
Well,
no, it's not fair, Peter.
okay, I'm not
simply
placing
not
the
fair.
obligation other than asking you, did any of them come to you and say, look, I'm sorry, I should have caught this. I was on these emails, I didn't read them, but I should have, and I should have told
you. No, look,
you.
I think there are people, obviously people would say, geez, what could I have done differently or whatever.
But have they said that to you?
Of course, but there's no person that I think has done anything where, any of those, there's no person on my staff that I believe deceived me or acted unethically or irresponsibly. Other
than one person?
Other than Mr. Wright, yes.
That nobody else there, in spite of what we've witnessed. I mean,
look, there's nobody else on my staff today. There are conflicting stories, and I'm not going to comment on whose story
about
I
others
believe
who
and
were
I
on
don't,
your staff.
who I believe and who I don't. But Mr. Wright, he's their boss. When you have problems with John Gameshi or Evan Solomon, you don't go around firing everybody who worked for them. That's not the fair thing to do.
On that point, you're known as somebody who is not shy about making your feelings known.
Right.
Within small circles and in private circles. You're also known as a bit of a control freak. And that's why a lot of people can't understand why you didn't know what was going on. They also can't understand why at some point you didn't go to the office and said, what the hell is going on here?
Well, look, Peter,
until the story broke.
I found out the day after the story broke.
But did you get mad at those around you when this happened?
Of course I'm upset. Of course I was upset about it, Peter. I've been very upset about it. And, you ask yourself, what could we do differently in the future? But, look, at some point, I would say this. I went through a period where I was very angry. But you just got to let that anger go. You have to move on. We dealt with the situation. The two people who are responsible have been held accountable. The taxpayers have been repaid. And, and people are being held responsible for their actions.
Do you have any personal regrets about the way you handled it through all this?
Oh, probably a little bit, but I'm not going to bare my soul here. But we always go back and look, how could we have done it differently? But I will say this, this was, not only did I not know, this was obviously completely contrary to what I wanted. Mr. Duffy himself has admitted, I told him he should repay it. I told him I wasn't going to defend what he did, and I thought he should repay the expenses. He didn't. Look, I wish I'd been told that he wasn't going to, because then I would have dealt with the situation very differently.
Have you talked to Nigel Wright since you fired him?
We had, I think, one very brief conversation.
What was that about?
It was just after he took a job in London and wished him well.
And it was just, that was it?
Yeah.
Did you fire him, or did he quit?
Well, look, I made a decision. Mr. Wright accepted that decision.
Last question on this point of accountability, because that's what got you into office,
Yep.
right? You'd agree with that.
Yep.
When Canadians look at a list of some of the names of people that you appointed into positions, you mentioned Duffy, but the list goes on. There's 8, 10, 12 of them who've either been charged with something, gone to jail because of something, or suspicion has been raised surrounding them and investigations are underway into the way they conducted their office. Does that reflect on your judgment, seeing as you appointed these people?
Well, look, I think in the Senate, we've had a problem with a range of senators appointed by me or others. I think it's a reflection on the institution. Look, I'd say in other cases, this is a government where, I think if you look at the record of our cabinet and our government, I think people may not agree with all the decisions we make, but I think they generally can agree that money's being expended on the things it's supposed to be expended on.
I want to look at the broader international situation for a moment, and the ISIS situation specifically. Is the fight against ISIS winnable? And I ask that because more and more analysts and generals say this war will never be won solely from the air, that there has to be ground forces supplied by the countries involved, directly involved, the Iraqs, etc., as opposed to Western forces. But those countries don't seem to be able to fight on the ground. there's a question of willingness, a question of ability. So is this a winnable war?
We are training a good fighting force in northern Iraq. And, the Kurds and the people we're allied with there have been doing a very good job. But look, I think that analysis is all correct. To really defeat this opponent and roll them back, there's going to have to be a more effective ground force, and I don't think there's any desire or willingness for that to come from our countries. In the case of Syria particularly, there's obviously got to be a political solution that goes beyond the fighting. I mean, the real problem in Syria, there's no one to support, or in our judgment, almost no one to support. You've got the Assad government, and you've got the jihadist extremists. I mean, these essentially are most of the fighters. So unless
but there's no indication of any political solution to that.
Unless you can pull moderate elements out of both camps, you don't have a political solution. But what we do know is that we cannot just withdraw, allow ISIS to spread the way it was spreading a year ago, and use this as a staging area for international terrorist attacks against the world, including against us. That's why it remains important, even with the deficiency of the ground forces in the region, that we keep this organization on the defensive.
So we're in for the long haul?
We have to be in for the long haul. I'm not hearing, it's easy for the Liberals or NDP to say we can pull out Canadian forces, but I don't think our allies are going to say we could all pull out. That would be an absolute catastrophe, not just for the region. Not just adding tens of millions more refugees and displaced persons, like as we've been talking about the last few days, but it will present very quickly a radical escalation in the security threat to our own countries. We cannot tolerate that.
Let me pick you up on the point of the migrants.
Yeah.
And sort of the broader question. Are we, and when I say we, I don't mean Canada, but the West in general, are we doing enough to help out that situation in terms of the migrants, the refugee situation, after a situation that in many ways has been created by us, the big us once again, in terms of the West, through whether it was Iraq, Syria supporting the rebels trying to bring down, or the insurgents trying to bring down Assad, or in Libya? You can point to the West as being part of the reason why we got into this situation.
I don't think this is really fundamentally the responsibility of the West, but I would agree that we have, as rich, privileged nations, we have an obligation to help, and we have significant security interests in doing so.
But are we doing enough?
Are we doing enough? What's enough? What's enough, Peter? What's enough, Peter? There are millions of displaced persons that we know of whose day-to-day survival is in jeopardy. Notwithstanding how terrible this is, there is no refugee-based solution alone to that problem. We're not going to bring millions and tens of millions of people out of these regions. We can't depopulate them. That's not a solution. That's obviously part of the solution. We try and help those who are most vulnerable, but we also have to do what we can to counter the cause of this problem, which is a violent movement attempting to conquer an area and kill and displace millions and millions of people.
But are we resigning ourselves to the fact that we are going to have to keep looking at pictures like we saw the other day of that 3-year-old boy?
Well, I don't know we resign ourselves to it in the sense that, God help us, we ever get to the standpoint where that doesn't affect us. I don't need to tell anybody this is a tragedy. But it's 10 million times bigger than that. That's the tragedy. And, we've got a very ugly situation that has real potential implications on us, and we're going to have to operate on all paths to try and fix it. It's not just enough to turn and say, oh, let's admit more refugees. We can admit thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more refugees, and we're still going to see those kinds of images. So we got to be doing a lot more than that.
If we end up in a minority government situation, which the polls would suggest is the likelihood now. Polls change, a long way to go on the campaign, but you never had any resistance talking about the possibility of minorities and coalitions and whatever in the last election campaign, so I'm assuming I can ask you.
You can ask me.
Yeah.
No,
well, here's the question though. Is it a correct assumption to make that whichever party ends up, if we're in a minority situation, whichever party ends up with the most seats should form the government?
Yeah, that's I think how conventionally our system works, and for good reason. And that's my position. Obviously, our view is we're going to win. We're going to win strong. But my position's always been, if we win the most seats, I will expect to form the government, and if we don't, I won't.
So even as the current government, if you were just a couple seats behind, you wouldn't try to figure out a way to...
No.
You would resign?
Yeah. Well, I would not serve as Prime Minister. No, I think you have to have the most seats in Parliament to go the Governor General, and that's, in this country, in our system, we have what's called a Westminster-style system, and we don't elect a bunch of parties who then, as in some countries, get together and decide who will govern. We ask people to make a choice of a government, and so I think that the party that wins the most seats should form the government.
Here's the last question. I'm asking each of the leaders this. It's not about politics. It's not about policy. It's about you. So the question then is, what is it about you, Stephen Harper, that you feel should make a good Prime Minister?
We were talking about this a bit earlier. You're now trying to put me in the Donald Trump position, where I'm going to talk.
If you want to give me a Donald Trump answer,
talk about myself
ears.
And say we're the smartest person ever. I think we've got the right plan for the country. I've laid that out to you.
Yeah, but that's policy.
No,
I'm talking about you.
No, but policy's all part of it. Look, I will say to people, I love the job. It's an honor to serve this country. I'll never have an experience like it again. But it's the people's decision, and I accept whatever that decision is, and I'm hopeful that we'll get another mandate, but if we don't, look, all I say is that it's been a great honor to serve, and I think we've done a good job, and we can continue doing a good job.
Mr. Harper, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.